morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's not my intention to repeat, do not be afraid, because it seems to me the atmosphere with you, seminar participants are so nice that I don't think anyone is afraid. So once again, a very warm welcome to all of you. And I would like to pass to the chair of the first session, Emeritus Bishop William Morris. Bishop, we are under your leadership.
Thank you, Krzysztof. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
First of all, I'd just like to start today by recognising the originators of our land and their spirit is with us each day. And also, the next thing is to thank Krzysztof and William for the lovely evening last night. Much appreciated. Thank you, Krzysztof and William. And thirdly, there's some new members here today. So if we just go around the table and introduce ourselves, it'll catch up with those that are new today. So if we might start with there, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mustafa Ali, and I'm from the University of Southern Queensland on the Springfield campus.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Venerable Wu Ping from Kilmartin Learning College.
Thank you.
Good morning, Robert Gascoigne from the School of Theology at Australian Catholic University.
Greetings, I'm Roberto Garcia from Toowoomba Council.
Amy Prendergast from Multicultural Policy Department of Social Services.
Brian Sparksman from the Catholic Diocese of Toowoomba.
Alan Brummett, Philippine Consul General for Queensland.
Lynn Smith from Settlement Multicultural Department of Social Services in Brisbane.
Jared Hall from the School of Theology, Australian Catholic University on the Brisbane campus.
Morning, Brian Adams. I'm from Griffith University as the Director of the Center for Interfaith and Cultural Dialogue.
Your chair this morning, William Morris. I'm Emeritus Bishop of the Diocese of Toowoomba.
Good morning, Chancellor. I'm from USQ. Also look after the USQ Islamic Center.
I'm Sandra Karol. I'm from the Australian Catholic University Education Faculty, Strathfield, Sydney campus.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good morning and peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Hanif Abdul Razak. I'm the head of the Multi-Faith and Multicultural Center of the John and Learning College. I think everybody knows it's a Buddhist foundation, and I'm the only Muslim there, and I head the center. Thank you.
Wayne Briscoe, Cultural Diversity Queensland, which is part of the State Department of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and Multicultural Affairs.
Sue Chandler, Settlement and Multicultural Affairs Department of Social Services, Brisbane.
Connor Sweeney from the John Bolton Institute for Marriage and Family, Melbourne.
Krzysztof, Batorowicz, Multicultural Center, University of Southern Queensland.
Robert McGuckin, the Bishop of the Catholic Diocese of Toowoomba.
Brian Kilmartin, Consul of the Republic of Poland in Queensland.
I'm Marcus Hales. I actually work here at USQ.
Thanks, everybody. That just puts us all in the picture again. And the back there, we'd like to just say hello to everybody.
Hi, my name's Evan Ruckle, Multi-Faith Chapter Coordinator for USQ.
Hi, I'm Helen McCartney, and I'm a student here at USQ, just come here.
Thank you very much. Our fourth session this morning starts off with Father Brian Sparksman, who's the Chancellor of the Diocese of Toowoomba, and Brian's conversation with us this morning is looking at the role of the Second Vatican Council in developing peace and ecumenical dialogue. Thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you. And should I say perhaps to everyone, Happy Valentine's Day? Where's the flowers? I thought to begin this discussion on peace, I would go back to the origins of some of the different languages. So in 12th century French, peace meant freedom from civil disorder, silence, but most importantly, the one I've got in red is reconciliation. The Latin pacem means agreement, absence of war, and tranquility. The Spanish and Italian versions mean to make a covenant or a pact. And the Old English derivations include happiness and peace of mind. And a little bit later on in the same source, the meaning of quiet, the absence of cessation or war or hostility. And for the gardeners among you, a hybrid tea rose called peace. I want to start with my experience of peace in the world, because as I was growing up and became conscious of the world around me, it was a world of war. And when I was 5 years old, I accompanied my father and his two brothers to enlist for the Second World War. Dad had children and farms to look after, so he didn't go to the war. But his two brothers did. One never returned, and the other returned with serious health problems that dogged him for the rest of his life. So I was quite aware of the deprivations of wartime. But then in 1945 I became very much aware of peace. Life moved much more freely. We went on holidays, we had more ready money. There was a general feeling of relaxation and life was positive. There was peace that I experienced in my family, and I believe there was peace in our family spiritual life. I was always aware as I grew up of bigotry, even though thankfully I grew up in a family that didn't have a shred of bigotry. I firmly believe that peace, displayed in cohesion in our religious affiliations, would be a greater guarantee of peace in the world. And I think before we leave here today, it will be good to ask ourselves what peace really means for us. On the 25th of January 1959, the Catholic world entered a new era with the calling of the Second Vatican Council by John the 23rd. I have to say that it was a great pleasure for me to catch a glimpse of him at an audience in Rome in 1963. I see two documents from the Second Vatican Council as most pertinent to our subject. Lumen Gentium, the one on the Church, and the document on ecumenism. But I'd like to go first to the encyclical which came out just weeks before he died, Pacem in Terris, Peace in the World. The first words of that talk to us about establishing a universal peace in truth, justice, charity, and liberty. And the letter is addressed by John the 23rd to the clergy and the faithful of the whole world and to all people of goodwill, beginning a trend in the papal documents being directed to everyone, not just the Catholics. I've managed to get rid of some of the quotes that we had yesterday, but I want to just read a few for you. The first paragraph says, "Peace on earth, which all men of every era have most eagerly yearned for, can be firmly established only if the order laid down by God be dutifully observed." And further on, "But the progress of science and technology show above all the infinite greatness of God, who created the universe and mankind. They show how the turmoil of individual peoples contrast with the perfect order of the universe." Further on, "God, the Creator, has imprinted in people's hearts an order which his conscience reveals to him or to them and enjoins them to obey. And that the establishment of such a peaceful community is demanded for the universal common good." And finally, as we heard briefly yesterday, it stresses the right to private property, which increases the peace and prosperity of the state. If I can turn to the document, the Dogmatic Constitution on the Church, in Chapter 3 it says, "The Church is led by the bishops, bound as a college, in unity with the Pope, in a bond of charity and peace." The Church is also referred to in the phrase which we came to use much after the Second Vatican Council, the people of God. We are the people of God. And the Church boundaries are extended far beyond the Catholic Church. This is clear in a variety of forms. For example, in the recognition given to Christian churches and to all ecclesiastical communities. And as we heard yesterday, it goes even further with the notion that even atheists are included in that. What means peace? And for that we can turn to the decree on ecumenism. In paragraph 15 we read that all other Christian churches are related to us. And in the next paragraph 16, likewise, Jews, Muslims, and all who seek God are connected to us in that same bond of peace. It's interesting that in the first reading or the first setting of that decree on ecumenism, it put ecumenism and interreligious dialogue together. But before they were promulgated, they had been separated so that each ecumenism and relationships with non-Christians have their own special documents. The ecumenism decree published on the 21st of November 1964, and the one for non-Christians, Nostra Aetate, on the 28th of October 1965. And it says something that none of the others say. It says, "The truth is to be respected wherever it is found," but it specially mentions Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and Judaism. Out of that, over the years, we've come to learn that the basis for all religious groupings is our common humanity. What we have in common is our humanity. What the Christian churches have in addition is a common baptism. The ecumenical decree makes some serious statements, but I've selected it makes lots of serious statements, but I've selected a few. It admits that blame for the separation, otherwise known as the Reformation, was on both sides. Promotes the restoration of ties without any necessary return to Rome. We went through a period where people would preach saying we can only have unity amongst people if everyone comes back to Rome. But that certainly goes against that. Thirdly, calls for the Roman Church to reform itself as part of the process of reunion. That ecumenism should be everyone's concern, and that genuine ecumenism involves continuous personal renewal and institutional renewal. Divisions can be overcome through serious dialogue and deeper knowledge of each other's scriptures. I have highlighted those because I believe that the theme of charity and peace is a given ingredient of them all. It's very interesting too that most of those points have found a home in our revised Code of Canon Law for the Catholic Church in 1983. I want also to mention another document that I've used a lot. It's the Directory for the Application of the Principles and Norms of Ecumenism, commonly just called the Directory, published in the 25th of March 1993 by the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity. I'm not quoting it because I see it as a legal document, but because it gives ways and hints of promoting peace in Christian communities. It, for instance, specifies a simple requirement for me as a Catholic priest, if I were the only minister in a Western town, to share Eucharist with members of other denominations prior of the function of their denomination. One of the lovely documents, I think, that's come out of the Catholic Church was this lovely, homely letter of John Paul II called That All May Be One from 1995. One quote from it, which I think is marvellous. As Catholics, embracing the commitment to ecumenism is challenging. Yet wonderfully, through the sacraments we have received, we have the opportunity to create a place of peace in the Catholic Church for our separated sisters and brothers. I'm trying to establish a case that keeps peace at the forefront. We here, as I said yesterday briefly, in this part of the world have had two meetings, one being Church in rural Queensland, hosted by Bishop Morris at our retreat centre from the 15th to the 17th of December 1996, which had the heads of church from every grouping, every diocese in Queensland. And then, as I said yesterday, that was revamped into a document, Living Church in Rural Queensland, in 2009. In that last gathering with the participants, they, with great deliberation, chose as a theme expressing their resolve the words of St. Paul to Ephesus. Now, in Christ Jesus, you who were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ, for he is our peace. In his flesh he has made both groups into one and has broken down the dividing wall, that is, the hostility between us. put that in there, not chronologically, but because it's one of the last mentions that the word peace gets in documents to do with ecumenism and interfaith relations. So I think I want to say that we have to go back to a time where peace was really to the forefront in all our documents. So I wanted to quickly, how am I going for time?
You've got about 2 minutes.
Good Lord. Well, the documents that do not mention peace are the ones that you put together with the Anglican Bishop of the Diocese of Toowoomba at that time, the Reverend Ray Smith. And it is a bit like the directory. It gives things that we can do. I want to quote in full, though, if I may, a statement from the ecumenical muster at Charleville to the congregations from which we have come. The muster was not sheep, by the way. It was people with like mind getting together to discuss ecumenism. And it says, this ecumenical muster praises God for the agreement. We affirm the agreement as another step forward in the ecumenical process. We commit ourselves to ongoing conversation, prayer, and inter-church activity. Led by the Spirit, we will model ecumenism by continuing to share our story, so helping to heal the pains of the past and the present. And we pray to the Spirit for this. I want to make very brief reference, it deserves more, and it's very important, to the National Council of Churches gathering in Adelaide, which produced a document, Australian Churches Covenanting Together, July 2004, and it has added participant churches up till this time. Unfortunately, I can't really keep going. But
well, you've got a few more minutes because I just noticed we did start late.
Okay.
So.
But I want to name churches because yesterday we had signs up on the board which were saying, you know, the Christians have these. Actually, the Christians at the Adelaide conference in 2004 had 19 churches. And I very quickly and only once will name them. The Anglican Church of Australia, the Antiochian Orthodox Church, the Armenian Apostolic Church, the Assyrian Church of the East, Chinese Methodist Church in Australia, Churches of Christ in Australia, Congregational Federation, Coptic Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Indian Orthodox, Lutheran Church of Australia, Martoma Church, Religious Society of Friends, the Quakers, the Roman Catholic Church, the Romanian Orthodox Church, Serbian Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox, Salvation Army, and Uniting Church in Australia. If I can just snatch words from that document. In an effort to say that it's not all even travelling. But one dimension being mentioned was sharing physical resources such as buildings. Only 12 churches could find themselves able to sign that. When it came to the recognition of the sacrament of baptism, 11 churches. When it came to invite welcome members of each other's church to share in the Eucharist according to pastoral need, one signatory from 2 churches, Church of Christ and the Uniting Church. Fairly much the same scene for the sharing of ordained ministry. They finished up with a pledge to continue to discuss and articulate within our churches the meaning and significance of our involvement in the quest for a more visible expression of unity and possibilities for further engagement in ecumenical partnership. To explore such further steps, it will be necessary to make more clearly visible the unity of all Christian people in this country. I think I'm going to finish up with some very new news. I think I've mentioned all of these things, these notes here previously. I want to turn to the document Conflict to Communion. The Lutherans and the Catholics have been on their ecumenical journey for the past 50 years. The statement of justification by faith, or an agreement therefore, was made on the 31st of October 1999. Just as a brief aside, on that day I was invited to speak in the local Lutheran church, and afterwards they gave me a bottle of wine and I said I'd come back at any stage. But now, amazingly, they're looking ahead in the dialogue between Catholics and Lutherans to celebrate together the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. That will be in 2017. From Conflict to Communion is the name of a joint document from the Lutheran Roman Catholic Commission on Unity, presented last year in Geneva. The topics include basic themes of Martin Luther's theology, but the crux of it is, I'll quote here from Martin Junger, the General Secretary of the World Lutheran Federation, where he says, this commemoration will be international. It should be ecumenical, and it should call us to common witness. The Catholic reps had just a bit more to say. Also from our Catholic side, our own conviction is Ecclesia Semper Reformanda. That is, the life of the Church has to be reformed in all times, in every age, so that we have this common intention of reform on both sides. What we could do in this document is to indicate the main themes of the theology of Martin Luther in light of our own ecumenical dialogue, showing the many ideas of Martin Luther have been issues for the whole Church and important elements of renovation of the Church. Finishing this document could be the basis for all sorts of ecumenical dialogues. I really believe the mere existence of this document is a marvellous signal for discussion both as ecumenists and in inter-religious dialogue. So may we all do our very best to bring that peace into existence in both our ecumenical and inter-religious dialogues. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brian. Now we have an apology this morning from Professor Tracey Rowland, who has a family occasion this morning, I think a funeral. Is that right, Krzysztof? And so I'm introducing Dr. Connor Sweeney, who's going to deliver Professor Tracey's paper for us this morning. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Actually, this is my own paper, which I put together this week, so I wouldn't want to misrepresent Dr. Tracey Rowland. But what I want to do today is look at the thought of Karol Wojtyła, or John Paul II, as he came to be known. Look at his thought in relation to person, family, and civilization and love. In many respects, interreligious dialogue, ecumenical dialogue, the family, the person, has a lot to do with what we say there. We all are persons, we all come from families. Persons and families are very important in terms of how a society understands itself, how a society works. So it's, in many respects, a common pursuit. But it's also true that, as I see it, interreligious dialogue and ecumenical dialogue works from the particular to the universal. So we all need to sort of say what we particularly believe. And what I want to do today is say, what does JP2 say about the person, about the family, from within the resources of his own Catholic Christian faith. So what I want to do today is give a brief tour of some of the sources that inform JP2's thinking on person and family as it relates to what he calls the civilization of love. So for JP2, the family is at the heart of building a civilization grounded in love. In his 1981 apostolic exhortation, Familiaris, consortio, the Pope concluded with the stunning claim that the future of humanity passes by way of the family. Clearly, the family is important for JP2. For the family, built on the self-giving love of man and woman in marriage, is, as JP2 puts it, a communion of persons. He describes marriage and family as a complex of interpersonal relationships where fatherhood and motherhood, filiation and fraternity introduce the person into the human family and into the family of God, which is the Church. The recovery of the notion of the family as the domestic church in the documents of Vatican II is developed by JP2 in a way that reveals the truly Christological and ecclesial character of the family. The way in which the family is not simply a natural or social reality with purely neutral human ends, but is at its heart an iconic carrier of a human person in his or her journey to God, and thus a path to holiness. So JP2 sees the family very much related to the love of God revealed in Jesus Christ. There is, in fact, in the structure of marriage and family itself, a creational imprint, so to speak, of the Trinitarian God in the dynamic of spousal and familial love. In his 1994 letter to families, John Paul II expanded his reflection of the family to include this explicitly Trinitarian dimension, describing, quote, how the primordial model of the family is to be sought in God himself in the Trinitarian mystery of his life. So this is very much turning out to be a very particular account of what the family is within the context of Christian faith for JP2. It is fitting then when JP2 exhorts families to become what you are. When the family becomes what it becomes a living microcosm of the God who is love, fully disclosed in Christ, and whose love is poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit. In this way, the civilization of love, which we can describe as a concrete social and cultural set of practices that embody God's love in the world, is served by the family's ground-level witness of love between its members. The family signifies love in the concrete, disclosing it in the particular intensity and closeness of the bonds which come to be between persons and generations within the family, as JP2 says. And because the family finds itself riven with love as its identity and mission, JP2 says that it is placed at the center of the great struggle between good and evil, between life and death, between love and all that is opposed to love. So there's my basic introduction to JP2 and the family, and I'll now move to some of the major sources that inform this kind of position. First section is experience and phenomenology. As a young priest, Karol Wojtyła, as he was then known, was very close to the struggles of young people and married couples. He made the revolutionary move of starting a marriage preparation program in the Archdiocese of Krakow and counseled and mentored a total of 160 couples over a span of 28 months. Much loved by those who saw his pastoral advice, Wojtyła gained extensive insight into human love through these experiences. Later explaining how his encounter with engaged couples convinced him that, quote, young people are always searching for love. They want their love to be beautiful. If they give in to weakness, in the depths of their hearts, they still desire a beautiful and pure love. Ultimately, they know that only God can give them this love. As a result, they are willing to follow Christ without caring about the sacrifices this may entail. Wojtyła would later recall that, as a young priest, I learned to love human love. These experiences helped to form Wojtyła's enduring interest in the themes of marriage, family, and sexuality. Attention to fundamental human experience was also something he was familiar with at an intellectual level. Wojtyła was influenced by phenomenology and personalism, particularly in the thought of German phenomenologist Max Scheler, with their attention to human experience and intersubjectivity, and the way in which the person is disclosed in the dimension of action. So for JP2, a purely objectivist account of the person from the outside, as it were, at the level of substance, outside of the person's concrete life world, so to speak, cannot ultimately do justice to the full reality of the interior depths of the person. And Wojtyła later emphasized the importance of the Jewish philosophers of dialogue, Franz Rosenzweig, Martin Buber, and Emmanuel Levinas, all of whom stressed that coexistence, the I and the thou, are fundamental to the existence of man. And all of this opened the young Wojtyła to the importance of affectivity and relationality in the description of the human person, which we can see will become important when he starts to apply more rigorous Trinitarian analysis. All in all, these pastoral and philosophical influences came together in his 1960 book on sexual ethics called Love and Responsibility, where he opened up sexuality to an affective and relational way of thinking that in significant ways allowed him to overcome a tendency in the tradition that located the telos, or ends of sexual union, purely at the level of nature, thus making it appear extrinsic to the personal reality of love. Here, always attentive to the way in which the phenomenon present themselves, Wojtyła paid close attention to how factors such as the sexual urge, sensuality, attraction, desire, emotion, sentiment, and the like are the effective dynamisms that allow love to flourish. So they're not something that are opposed to love. That is, when properly ordered, these elements are in fact the raw ingredients of love, the engine that impels the person to another and through which the unique interpersonal relationship of husband and wife becomes possible. In this, Wojtyła showed how the bodily dynamics of love actually enter into and express the horizon of the person, the dimension of love. In the context of body persons, there is no such thing as pure body or pure spirit. There is rather a unified whole where body references person and person references body, to the point that it becomes impossible to see where one begins and the other ends. This way of thinking would deeply influence his approach to sexual ethics, allowing him to see how the biological is actually caught up in the reality of love. In sum, we see in these experiential and phenomenological dimensions of JP2's love some profound insights into the human person that is later more theological thinking would confirm and develop. And so it's to his theology, strictly speaking, that we now turn. And I begin first with his Christocentrism. So his belief that the person of Christ fully reveals man to himself. Elected as Pope in 1978, JP2 wasted little time issuing his first encyclical. Redemptor Hominis was released in 1979. Its first line reading, Jesus Christ, the Redeemer of man, is at the center of the universe and of history. While JP2 deeply respected what philosophy and experience could say about the human person, in the end, all that really matters for him is the discovery of one's identity that comes with being a child of God. In this light, JP2 made constant reference to a key text of Vatican II document, Gaudium et Spes, where it is affirmed that, quote, only in the mystery of the incarnate Word does the mystery of man take on light. Christ, the final Adam, by the mystery of the revelation of the Father and his love, fully reveals man to himself and makes the supreme calling clear. For JP2, this is more than a cosmetic principle. Christ really does change the whole way that we approach the person. Christ shows us the Father, heals the wounds of sin that preclude our attaining his likeness, makes us theological persons, adopts us into the divine life. With this Christocentrism, in conjunction with his personalist and phenomenological categories, JP2 opens human nature itself to the dynamic of grace, revealing the person as a theological creature who receives his identity in history, in the encounter with Christ through the Church. The Swiss theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar stressed that one does not become a person in the full theological sense until one receives the mission that comes with being called by Christ. The significance of this is that becoming a person in Christ through baptism opens one to a world in which created dynamisms now become the signs of a new spiritual reality. This, of course, corresponds to the basic logic of a sacrament in Catholic thought, defined in simple terms as a sign that makes visible the supernatural mystery. For JP2, the person becomes a sign of the mystery of the Father's love in the world, primarily in and through being gift for the other. This insight, sharpened by Gaudium et Spes' teaching that persons only discover themselves by making a sincere gift of self, becomes the basis of John Paul II's sustained account of the sacramental dimension of the person who come to be called his theology of the body. And this constitutes my final section. Delivered as a series of general audiences in Rome between September 5th, 1979 and November 28th, 1984, the theology of the body is in many ways a remarkable synthesis of JP2's experiential and phenomenological foundations with a robust Christocentrism and a scriptural ressourcement, or back to the sources, so to speak. In it, he identifies the human body as a sacramental sign that discloses what he calls the invisible mystery hidden in God from eternity. That is, at the core of this claim is the conviction that being human, being male and female, being husband and wife, being father and mother, in some way lie at the very heart of the divine mystery. In a certain way, making visible this mystery, this meaning of love in and through that relationship, those relationships in the world. In this relational dimension of the person, this capacity to be gift for the other, JP2 sees the fullness of the image of God. So he approaches the body by reading it, not as an objective biological entity, but as a relational opening to the other, that in and through this openness attests to the ultimate other, God, to whom we owe our existence. Working within the revealed scriptural narrative, reading Genesis through Christological eyes, JP2 argues that the body is iconic of origin, relation, and difference. First, to be a body is to be from someone. That is, no person can self-originate, but always stands within a relational web of existence. And our fundamental relation to our parents is the fundamental point here, which shows the fact we cannot self-originate. Second, to be a body is to be for someone. To fully be oneself, one needs the other. Third, to be a body is not just to be from and for the human other, but for JP2 it is also to be marked with the greater sign of being from and being for God himself, to be oriented towards the divine communion of persons. We can unfold these insights in two movements. First, in the Genesis text, Adam's realization that alone he is somehow incomplete, and the subsequent creation of Eve as his equal counterpart, is seen by JP2 as an important confirmation that the person is a being fundamentally created for communion. Indeed, in a remarkably bold stroke, bold in relation to the anthropology of Augustine and Aquinas, for example, JP2 posits that the text in Genesis teaches us that man, that is male and female, became the image of God not only through their humanity, but also through the communion of persons. In other words, it is not only the individual who is the image of God, but also the individual in relationship. The principle of fruitfulness expands this reality even further, turning a marriage, the I-thou, into a family, a we. Second, all of this is radically contextualized when JP2 argues that this horizontal principle of relation, fundamentally represented between the man and the woman, emerges out of the more fundamental relation that we have towards God. That is, the person's capacity for relationship at a human level derived from our capacity for a relationship with God. The principle of relation that is encoded horizontally in our capacity for human communion is derivative of the greater principle of relation that exists between the person and God. We desire the human other because there is at the heart of our experience a restless longing for the divine other that nothing in this world can satisfy. In all of this, JP2 shows how all of the relational potential of the human person, created, revealed, and redeemed in Christ, called to communion with God and the other through the Spirit, is not simply something cosmetic, but is rather part of the very theological identity of the person. And I'll now conclude. So when we tie all of the strands of JP2's thinking together, we discover at the very center of human existence the principle of love that signifies the greater call to love that we are all called to. The phenomenon of spousal and familial love is not a neutral, merely natural or social reality, as much as it is the concrete mediation of love and an openness to divine grace. When Christ raises the man-woman relationship to become a radiant icon of Christ's love for his church, as we see in the book of Ephesians, and indeed the relationship of the divine persons, the family that emerges out of the created fruitfulness of the spouses deeply participates in the mediation of God's love in the world. As sign, the family is not meant to be a closed-in, isolated unit, but rather a light to the world, a contributor to the building up of the civilization of love. This it does not so much by any active doing, as much as by simply being itself. A sign signifies simply by being itself. Of course, we know that especially today, this being itself, the family, is not an easy task. Dark shadows abound, both in the culture at large and in our own hearts. All of us carry fresh wounds and old scars. But we must ask ourselves, why do these wounds and scars hurt so much? Love is difficult, love hurts, precisely because it is love, a mystery that we cannot even begin to comprehend. The task, therefore, demands an ever deeper immersion in the grace and mercy God offers marriages and families, and the discovery here of the genuine spousal and familial spirituality. In this way, families truly can be an important component of what John Paul II has called the building up of the civilization of love. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sweeney. We have Mr. Brian Kilmartin, Honorary Council of the Republic of Poland, who is going to address us now with regards to John Paul II and his influence on the development of relations between Australia and the Holy See and the impact of the Polish community in Australia. Brian, thank you.
Thank you, Bishop. In recognising the undoubted scholarship of the previous thank you. In recognising the undoubted scholarship of the previous precinct talk, it would be appropriate to recognise also the many many legacies which the pontificate of John Paul II has delivered to us. The family and his contribution to the civility and good of the family will be one of the many legacies. In the course of my discussions this morning, I was going to refer in depth to George Beagle's book, Witness to Hope, which is described as a biography of Pope John Paul II. To those who would know their subject, I would commend the author's excellent presentation. And with respect to what we heard earlier, today no doubt there are topics which will require further reading and discussion and will provoke quite a lot of discussion, I'm sure, not only today but in the future. For those who would want to go possibly into greater depth beyond what we've heard today, I would draw your attention to the book I referred to, Witness to Hope, from page 336 onwards in that book, where there is an excellent discussion of a number of the matters which were raised this morning. And, for those who have the time to read those sections of George Beagle's book, I know you'll find the exercise very rich. On behalf of the Polish diplomatic and consular presence in Australia, let me record our appreciation of the opportunity to be here. Our ambassador was planning to come in its recognition, Krzysztof, of your outstanding role in Australia. The ambassador was particularly interested in this function. We heard yesterday about encouraging migrants to Australia to be Australians first. I don't know that in every way you've been an Australian, but nevertheless proud to carry the flag, the white over red flag, wherever you've gone. And you've drawn great credit to your former country of Poland and the work that you've done. Unfortunately, this morning we couldn't have Poland's ambassador here because the Marshal of the Polish Senate was planning to visit Australia as a guest of the Australian Senate. It wasn't possible for the ambassador to be here, but he wishes you well for the future. And it is a tribute also to the reputation of this forum and this particular part of the university that something that is prepared to devote some time. So all the very best, Krzysztof, for the future. We also heard this morning from Father Brian Sparksman, thank you, of St. Valentine's Day. Well, we recognise in Poland St. Valentine has to offer. We're thinking more today of St. Cyril and Methodius, who brought Christianity to Central Europe and to Eastern Europe, and it's their feast today. And in the Polish Church they'll be remembered extensively in holy masses throughout Poland. We would say that, with all due respect to St. Valentine, that those two saints have made an enormous contribution to the civilization of Europe. But they also brought a structure to the Polish and other Slavic languages. Those of us who've had the pleasure of studying Latin would notice the similarity, and not with the vocabulary of the Slavic languages, but with the structure, the grammar, the nouns decline and the verbs conjugate in the Polish language, and just as they do in the Latin tongue. So we'd seek to perhaps ask St. Valentine to be a little eclipsed for Polish purposes today. Pope Benedict said that the person of the consul is sacred. Implicit in that statement is not to put halos around ambassadors and consuls, but rather to give recognition to the fact that the embracement of diplomacy is a recognition that human beings can live together in a civilised way and not resort to violence as a way of solving the myriad of issues which must arise when you've got so many people alive on the planet. So instead of violence, diplomacy has a theme about it of the peace, such as what we've been hearing as part of the theme of the conference. The topic that I've been asked to talk on today has some measure of difficulty about it, in as much as it's not strictly speaking true to say that Pope John Paul II made the greatest of all contributions to diplomatic relations between the Holy See and Australia. That was something achieved by an earlier Pope, but in view of the number of inquiries that I've had over the last couple of days, I thought I just might diverse from a few minutes and just explain the way that the structure is the structures are organised. The Vatican has had in Australia since 1914 an office known as the Apostolic Delegation. The Apostolic Delegation was located in Sydney, in North Sydney. That was in an era where there were no formal diplomatic relations between Australia and the Vatican City. You might notice in some parts of the world you'll hear references to the Apostolic Delegations or to the Apostolic Delegate. That's almost invariably in situations where the Apostolic Delegate is in another country, but that country doesn't have formal diplomatic relations, a relationship but not a formal diplomatic one. In 1973, following the election of the Whitlam administration, matters changed and full diplomatic recognition was established between the Vatican and the Holy See. The post was then moved to Canberra, and of course it's known as a nunciature, which is the equivalent in Vatican speak of an embassy, or in the case of Commonwealth country, a high commission. So the head of that post is of course the nuncio, and that's the way. Well, technically, the nuncio is still the apostolic delegate to the Australian Bishops' Conference. There are a whole lot of controversies from time to time spring from that, of course, but in addition to being the delegate to the Australian Bishops' Conference, the nuncio wearing his own hat is the officially accredited delegate from the Holy See to Australia. And likewise, Australia has an embassy at the Holy See. It's had an embassy at the Holy See for many years. Until recently, there was an ambassador located in another country, often Ireland, who was cross-accredited to the Holy See. But during the currency of the Rudd government, that was changed. There is now a full-time ambassador in the Vatican. So it's now a full-time post. Likewise, diplomacy is organised in Australia. I know that a number of people have been interested in the role that my colleague Alan and I play. The relevant Vienna Conventions provide for ambassadors and consuls and non-career consuls, known as honorary consuls, to be appointed. It turns largely on the amount of diplomatic and consular traffic in the state concerned. And I think the Philippines has an embassy in Canberra, as does Poland. I think you have career diplomats in Sydney, don't you, Alan? Yeah, as Poland has career diplomats in Sydney as well, and non-career consuls in other parts of Australia. We tend to be lawyers or engineers or accountants or some such creatures, and we have limited scope under the relevant Vienna Conventions to discharge our consular duties. When we discharge our consular duties, of course, we have the same rights, privileges and immunities as the full-time consuls. So I thought there was of some use to lay that down as a platform of operation. I've outlined the role of the earlier popes, as I said, Pope, in the time of Pope Paul VI, the regularisation of the Apostolic Delegation in Sydney was achieved. So I would have to say that in terms of the actual impact, Pope John Paul II, in terms of diplomatic recognition or relationship here, could not be said to be as significant. However, it's significant in other ways. I would like to quote some passages from George Veagle's book, which demonstrate that clearly when Pope John Paul II took the role, he saw diplomacy as rather having a different role to the nation-states approach, which the Vatican seemed to pursue under earlier popes. I'm going to quote some passages here because I think it illustrates the point so well. John Paul understood that the Holy See's unique status in international law and diplomatic presence was to the Church's advantage. It gave the Church a place at the table in the international legal and political institutions and a forum for expressing its moral concerns. Similarly, the independence of the Vatican City microstate protected the papacy from becoming dependent on any state power. Vatican City-State guaranteed the Church's freedom, and in that sense it was an embodiment of this religious freedom idea that we've heard about, the idea we've been hearing about at the conference, religious freedom. For John Paul II, the Holy See's international legal status and the independence of the state, which he was sovereign, were not ends in themselves, but a means of achieving the real goals of the office of Peter, which was to preach the gospel and strengthen men and women in the church wherever they might be. The rules of the game, as understood in international politics, would not be allowed to impede that evangelical and apostolic mission. As early as the late 19th century, Pope since Leo XIII learned to engage world affairs through the moral force of their office. Now that reference was could be made there to the noted encyclical Rerum Novarum, and the encyclical we heard about yesterday, published to celebrate the 100th year of that noted encyclical. Pope John Paul II pressed the Church's disengagement from temporal power in new ways, in what amounted to a redeclaration of the Church's independence to pursue its unique moral role in world affairs without fear or favour. And by any test, it would be my argument that Pope John Paul II seized the initiative. His role in international diplomacy is one that should always be recognised. Perhaps it doesn't get the recognition it deserves, but His Holiness described communism as the great shame of our time. Shame, in his understanding, because it denied, being atheistic in its character, denied the very nature of humanity itself. And a situation arose where you had a Polish prelate, a Slav, dealing, as it were, with the Russians, the communists. Well put, I think it was Time magazine described the meeting as when the cross meets the Kremlin. It was perhaps leading to it, maybe it's exaggerating, but situation arose perhaps where the Pope could checkmate classical Communist Party thinking and explain that there was a new way. These encyclicals and statements and preachings showed that there was a new way ahead. I'll read some more of George Beagle's book because I think it's most instructive. The modern diplomats of the Holy See are priests whose instinctive first question on reaching any new assignment is, where are we going to say Mass tomorrow? But these new priest diplomats also prided themselves on their realism. Their task, as they saw it, was to manoeuvre within the boundaries of the possible to defend the Church's interests. Those interests were distinctive: freedom of the Church to manage its internal affairs in order to carry out in its missions of evangelisation, worship and service. Still, Vatican diplomacy, reflecting the days when the Holy See was a worldly power, had become used to thinking of those distinctive interests which much as the nation states thought of as their economical or political interests. And these subjects of negotiation between sovereign powers resulted in the past in perhaps a lot of grandeur. But now, under the new order, Pope saw himself as some sort of foreign minister who wanted to reach out to other countries to agitate for the matters which the Pope considered to be essential to the nature of humanity itself, recognising the existence of a God, follows on what we heard in the previous speaker, the nature of God and the nature of humanity ourselves and our own ability to reach out constructively towards others. Where I think the Pope's greatest contribution in terms of his impact on the Australian community is really a mirror of his ability to interact with a whole range of other people, be they princes or prime ministers or presidents or dictators. It was in the nature of the man. I don't know how many people here had the opportunity to meet the Pope. He had said to have had a way about him of being on one hand a knockabout type of man, but someone who could mix it, someone who could, in a way, know how to present arguments to kings and queens and rulers and dictators, yet at the same time talk to the train driver or the labourer in the street. And I think this gave him this remarkable edge to slowly but surely plant ideas and seeds in the minds of people who could then take agendas forward. Most memorable, of course, in Australia is the visit to Australia in 1986. I'm sorry, 1973, when he was Cardinal Archbishop of Krakow. Interestingly, it took place in the year of the Redemption. Australia, it is pleasing to know, put on the rigours and values of a full state reception for the Cardinal. Little perhaps did they know that someday he'd be the Pope. But his visit then and his visit in 1986 galvanised Polish people in Australia, and if you saw that galvanisation taking place, it becomes easy to see why the Pope was so easily able to galvanise thought wherever else he went in the world. I've always thought it interesting to consider the Pope's land rights speech at Alice Springs in the sermon. It said that perhaps the Jesuit community provided the speaking notes for that homily. Whether that's right or not, I don't know. But it certainly made a lot of people aware of the injustice which had been done to Aborigines, and I think helped create or foment the atmosphere in Australia that it needed to do something more to help the Aboriginal race. It's difficult in a short time to say do justice to a topic such as this, but it has to be said that the Pope's greater contribution was not so much to diplomatic relations between Australia and the Holy See, but more to diplomatic relations and effective diplomacy between the Vatican and other nation states of the world, and at the same time making enthusiastic the people of the many countries that he visited and encouraged them to clamour for change. The clamouring for change, certainly internally in Poland, brought about the collapse of communism. The president of the Polish Senate is due to come here. His late wife is a noted woman who was seen on the tower of the yards and get thanks to the nurse encouraging the workers to go back onto strike form in the early 1980s. This is just a good example of the way in which the Pope could mesmerise people, lay people to take action. So I hope that's been of some background information to the topic. Before them is not necessarily an academic title to develop pristine arguments about. I think it's more a practical occasion for giving recognition to one of the most outstanding figures of the last century.
Thanks very much, Brian. As you can see, we've got about 25 minutes for discussion before morning tea, so we've got a little bit over time. But we've been very fruitful this morning in the inputs, and so it's time now for us to have a discussion on inputs this morning, or even take it a bit wider with regards to some of the conversations yesterday. So it's over to the floor. Who would like to start off? Yes, Paul.
Mine's just a little bit of an aside. I don't think Father Brian celebrated the Mass for St. Valentine this morning, but I think he did celebrate Mass for St. Cyril and Methodius, and it does appear in the calendar this morning.
That'll be in the reports back to the Toowoomba Diocese respects the many conventions.
The Vatican Embassy in Australia sometimes get things wrong, and the President Ambassador Paul Gallagher, as an Englishman, a little Liverpudlian, Paul's a very good gin and tonic, but recently he sent me a birthday card and wished me a birthday a number which is a year younger than I am, so I'm not too sure whether their calendar's winding backwards. That does affect the date of which I retire, so I shall be writing to him and just putting that forward. But I wasn't too sure, Brian, when you made your comment there, when you were told by Bishop Morris you had 2 minutes, did you say good Lord, or did you say good my Lord? I wasn't too sure.
I probably said good Lord.
But that was interesting to hear the ecumenical struggle. And I was thinking what Marcus said yesterday. There's tensions in all this, isn't there? And it's sort of, sometimes it's a step forward and it's also a step backwards. But I think it depends really on our attitudes ourselves that we've got, that we take to these things and continuing these discussions. And they are taking place at a national level between the Catholic Church and a number of other Christian churches. Sometimes it's the things you mentioned yesterday about the ordinary of the Southern Cross. Some of these things perhaps aren't really helpful for the discussion. But there are discussions between the Catholics and the Lutherans, Catholics and the Anglicans and national bodies. I've recently been rolled onto the discussion on a national level between the Uniting Church and the Catholic Church. So a lot of these things, they're slowly taking place. They can take place at a national level, but I think the local engagement, I think is far more effective sometimes than what people might be talking about at a heady level or otherwise.
Thanks very much. This one.
Oh, thank you. Maybe just another aside about Cyril and Methodius. Many of us perhaps saw the opening of the Winter Olympic Games. You might remember the little girl, the Alice in Wonderland figure, reciting the alphabet in Russian. And the first letter A, Azbuka, the alphabet, an icon of Cyril and Methodius was shown, because it was those two saints who, apart from bringing the gospel to Eastern Europe, also gave the Eastern Slavonic people their alphabet, an adaptation of the Greek alphabet. And it's also worth mentioning that John Paul II wrote an encyclical commemorating Cyril and Methodius, Slavorum Apostoli, the apostles to the Slavs. So perhaps worth noting today. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Brian?
Yes. Father Sparksman. First of all, how many Brians are there?
You call me Brian.
Yeah, I just don't want to get confused with myself. How many Brians are actually here today? Okay.
Two.
Is it the name that attracts us to interfaith dialogue, or maybe we should have our own little conference of Brians?
Sanctity.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the question I have for you, Father Brian, is you talked about peace being the focus of the ecumenical and interfaith dialogue push for a while, and then it was left out. What was it replaced by? Or was it not really replaced, it was just kind of
If it was replaced, if it was replaced by anything, it was replaced by practical measures. It wasn't so much the inner feeling, but rather, what are we going to do with these two hands to promote ecumenism? And I have a feeling that we need to bring it back in.
And why is that? That's you said it had been there and it was important, but I didn't get it.
Because it's got such depth of meaning, I believe.
Does that incite to action? Is that what you're thinking? That we can't forget the vision, but it will allow us to work as well, so it combines the two? Or
to work and to be able to judge how we're going by the different aspects that we've achieved on the way.
So that would be the big evaluative standard.
The word tranquility, for instance, I believe that our ecumenical and interfaith dialogues have led us to a greater peace amongst each other. And that is a tranquility. We don't want to tear each other apart anymore, as perhaps we would have last century.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
My question is really one of clarification, and it's directed to Father Brian as well. Thank you for mentioning the coming celebration of contribution to the Lutherans in 2017. When you mentioned the document Conflict to Communion, you initially gave a date of 1999. Now, I may have missed that because, so it's really asking you to clarify. That was last year at Geneva?
The document on justification by faith was 1999.
Ah, that's it. Okay. And that was, could you just give a little bit more context to that?
The justification of faith was a teaching of Luther,
yes,
which had great prominence at the time of the Reformation. And I suppose there was tension between the Catholic Church and the Lutheran community about what that really meant. That statement took away the tension.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. And in fact, I should say there, one of the signatories of that was an Australian, Cardinal Cassidy, who is in retirement, I think, in Sydney.
Central Coast.
Yeah.
They discovered that when they could sit down and talk together, that they were talking out of the same book. But it took them a long time to realise the fact that because they weren't talking.
I just have to say, I'm a bit mind-boggled by the fact that we're talking about 2017, the Lutherans and Catholics getting together to celebrate the Reformation is just a before.
Part of my reason is I co-authored a paper on icons, actually, with the head of the Lutheran Religious Education Unit a couple of years ago in one of our journals, the Religious Education Journal of Australia. And I've co-presented at some workshops for the Lutheran churches, very close collaboration in Brisbane between the Lutherans and the Brisbane campus of ACU. And I've got colleagues in that area. So we've also done some curriculum reviews in religious education, myself and another colleague, of the Lutheran religious education program that goes through their schools. Primarily they're in Brisbane and in Adelaide. Of course, that's where the German...
Just to make a point about getting together, I think people on the Downs, in general, who knew him, would be delighted with the appointment as the first bishop in Australia of the Lutheran Church of Bishop John Henderson, who is one of the most ecumenical men I've met. So I'm looking forward to great things, and I think he'll be pushing this co-celebration.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you very much. I'm interested in Dr. Swain's the emphasis on the family, and I think not only the Christianity, the people of other faith also has the family in the core of the social structure. Unfortunately, the things developing these days in Australia and elsewhere, the institution of family is kind of under threat, and the institution of family came primarily through the religious institutions and the religious practice, but it has been embarrassed by the humanity at large. And this love and the family structure is not only within the human being, but also the other creatures. They express love between male and female in some way or the other. But human being is in sort of way of exceeding that boundary and trying to pretend that a man can be playing a role of a mother, and the women can be playing a role of a father, and that a man and man can be parents, and women and women can be parents as well. My concern is that this is going to be an open abuse of an institution that has been existence and honored by most of the people of faith, and probably beyond that. if some people want to unite together of same sex, they might call their union something else. Family, has a meaning. As a marriage has a meaning, and it's well established. Why should we disturb that well established norm and structure in order to accommodate something which is a new development? Why can't we call something else? If they want to have some rights, fair enough. We still want to give them right. They should not be disturbing the institution that will, well respected and regarded and functioning in the society. So I think the religious community has a role to play in this regard. That if you want to give some rights to somebody for whatever reasons, call it something else. But for God's sake, don't call it a marriage or a family of that nature. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sajid. Any comments?
Just on that last topic,
Mike.
Just on that last topic, these sessions are here to inform people. I must confess to ignorance as to how it works. If you've got people in the Islamic community here who want to go through marriages, do you conduct marriage ceremonies for those people? How does that work? And you're also licensed under the Commonwealth marriage laws to conduct a civil service as well as a religious service if you in fact conduct either. Can you explain to us how that works? And the next question I want to ask, if the Commonwealth persists in defining marriage law in the way that's in total contradiction to Christianity's understanding of the Islamic, or for that matter any other, what we describe as a religious understanding, should we abandon the conduct of civil ceremonies altogether, just conduct religious ceremonies, and people want to go for a civil registrar and formalise a civil service, they can do that, but the danger seems to me that the religious people associating themselves with this in a church or a mosque or synagogue with civil marriage, which is a total odds to our understanding of what it means.
I think I'm not a recognized Islamic scholar to make a religious comment, but for the social practice, it is very well established that when a Muslim man wants to marry a Muslim woman or vice versa, they go to a imam or recognized religious person who can solemnize the marriage between the two. That requires witnesses. At least 2 adult witnesses must be there. Marriage cannot be a secret or undercover activity. It must be recognized by the society, and that's why the witness is required. And this is the way it's being. For the validity of the marriage in Islamic Sharia, this is what is required. It's not required any civil or government law to satisfy. But whatever in Muslim countries, they kind of synchronize the two. So once a religious marriage is performed, it's recorded in the government book of marriage registry, and that's how it works in there. Now, if you ask me in Australia how people are going to do when they come to a civil union or something which is outside the established definition of marriage, I don't think there is any consensus within the Muslim community. But in general, there will be a strong opposition. And I think most of the established scholars will oppose that. They won't agree to marry men and men and women it doesn't matter what the situation is. Thank you.
Can I respond? Sure. Just one example is France, where civil marriages can only be performed by a civilly appointed celebrant. Here in Australia, Latter-day Saint bishops can be celebrants, imams can be civil celebrants, all of that. So if you want a religious marriage, it's not recognized by the state in France, so you have to have a civil celebrant do that. And then you would go before your imam or anything like that to have it religiously and culturally recognized. So that's a definite model that could happen here.
Thanks, Bob.
On that relationship, let's say a Catholic priest and Anglicans alike. Catholic priest is only authorised to celebrate marriages in Australia according to the rites of the Catholic Church. while he does this, it is also registered civilly. He's not performing in the civil marriage, but the wedding he's done, he does fill in the civil papers, and it perhaps has been suggested that if that does come into play, maybe we just should step back from being involved in any way whatsoever with the civil forms, but that's the way it works at the moment. A couple of times priests thought, okay, well, we just do a wedding according to the Marriage Act of 1964, whenever it was, and of course the registrar will write back to them saying, hey, you're not authorised to do this, you're only authorised to celebrate marriages according to the rites of the Catholic Church.
Just following the previous point, that was a practice in Poland, and the Polish Church until recently, the Polish clergy did not perform civil marriage services in Poland, so people would go to the town hall to register their marriage in a civil sense, and then the priest would witness the marriage of the two people in the Catholic Church. That's now changed, but that's something that perhaps it's too late in the day for the Australian Church to change, but it's led to a situation, I think, where the public think that the Commonwealth laws give people the right to marriage. I think that seems to be a common misunderstanding, whereas my right to marriage before I got married nothing to do with the gift of the state. But I don't think people understand that. People think that they get the right to marriage by force of the statute law. And I think this is where this marriage equality nonsense is coming from.
No? Cool. I could let you talk longer. Any of the speakers would like to comment on anything that's been said? Brian, you want to make any further comment?
Just locally, I think I'm right in saying that a number of years ago we had a discussion about the role of a priest in the Western towns in this diocese, because they were the only sort of rarely was there a registered minister of more than one denomination. And some people didn't want a church wedding, but they wanted to get married. There was nowhere in the world that priests was allowed to do a civil wedding. That's a problem that will still hold, I think.
One of my priests recently was explaining this to me. I said, why don't you get registered as a civil celebrant?
They wouldn't do it.
He said, I tried to do that. He said, no, I couldn't be registered as a Catholic priest and also a civil celebrant at the same time.
Yeah.
I said, well, maybe you can see that.
There's a beeline up there.
Karol, was there anything you'd like to add to? Brian?
Perhaps I should have said that one of the interesting things at the Pope John Paul II's time was the change of the makeup of the papal diplomatic service. For years and years, the diplomats and the councillors, for some delegates, were always Italian, but that's changed dramatically. So as the bishop reminds, before we've got an Englishman as the current nuncio, we've had an Indian as a councillor who's gone on to be a nuncio somewhere else. In fact, an African who's recently made a nuncio in somewhere in Africa. So the composition of the diplomatic service under John Paul II has altered dramatically. I think for the better. It's more representative of the church as a whole.
Thanks very much, Brian. Well, if there's no further questions and discussion, can I ask you, we're a little bit early, can we break for morning tea now and come back that little bit earlier, so it gives us a chance for the next discussion, if there's no more questions on this one? Is that possible?
Morning tea break.
And so what time do you want us back?
11:20.
It says 11:40, so we keep to the timetable. Sorry, 11:20. 11:20. Keep the timetable. Fine. Nothing. Right. 11:20. Thanks very much, everybody, and thanks very much to the speakers.